Yesterday, I walked into the gallery. I had a momentary flashback to a trip that I took some years ago to monasteries in Greece and Serbia, where when you knocked on the door, they would come and answer, and without saying a word, they would gesture you in and take you to the Catholicon, to the church. Without saying a word, they would simply gesture to the relics, to the relics, to the grace-bearing bones of those who had struggled, of those who had experienced all the struggles of life, and for whom grace had come home. So yesterday, I wanted to make the sign of the cross. I wanted to bend over and kiss a series of reliquaries of the spirit, of the heart, and the mind. And like all saints' relics, these are encounters with the detritus of life. Those of us who live in the Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church, we know so well that the lives of saints are simply the lives of profound sinners who have been blessed by grace. Their encounters with a landscape of grief and of grace, with mystery, with insanity, with doubt, with temptations, with exile, with calamity, with a heart longing, and sometimes with the hidden wholeness. Just as in monasteries, no words spoken, just ushered to the bones, bending the knee, prostration, kissing, the sign of the cross. Why? Why this response, this engagement? When you are in the presence of the holy, your senses are heightened, if not your understanding. That the external has poured him, that the eternal has poured himself into time and taken upon himself all the wounds of the world. So today, we attend to the life and work of Barry, attend at this sort of watershed moment in his life and in the life of his family. So I want to think a little bit about his virtuosity. Schleiermacher, in his second address, said that the virtuosity or the special calling of a person is at the same time the melody of their life. And it remains a simple, meager series of notes unless religion, unless faith, unless the holy tradition, with its endless rich variety, accompanies it with all notes and raises the simple song to a full-voiced, glorious harmony Barry's calling, his virtuosity, greets us in the theater of struggle. I, by the way, noticed on the little brochure for today that they dropped a T where it says, how do you put it? Theater of mortality? Or no, yeah, that's how it should be. It says morality. Didn't you mean mortality? All the bones, the whole thing. The whole earth is a reliquary. The whole earth, we walk on a reliquary. So Barry's virtuosity in the theater of struggle, the kind of landscapes of grace. As Schleiermacher points out, that calling is itself an encounter, a meeting, a melody. I haven't known Barry very long, and I don't imagine I know him well like many of you do. But we do share something. Of course, we share it with all of you. What we share is that chorus, that full-voiced and glorious harmony that through the cracks restores our ability to say in the midst of all we experience, our Father. Not over against, but out of the very depths of the struggle. Art, my old friend St. John Chrysostom said, art was given to us by God so that we may hold life together. Not fantasize, not idealize, or be nostalgic about the world, but work at seeing how it is held together in its awfulness and in its beauty. Barry has taught us to see who would not learn to look. From the reality of all nothing should actually spring a luminous whole, turn sheer despairing to most perfect gay. Barry has been in communion with the great cloud of witnesses. Had that chorus call forth his melody. I would like to speak just a little bit about how that chorus has inclined our friend's melody. The core and central axiom of the Orthodox tradition, and I remind you, entering the Orthodox Church isn't to enter a separate church. The Orthodox tradition belongs to all Christians. The core and central axiom of Orthodox tradition, the understanding, the revelation of the divine and human communion. All human experience has been taken, is taken, and shall be taken forever into the incarnation. This is echoed beautifully in that old Methodist hymn. Maybe you sang it in that Baptist church of yours in your childhood, that the Wesleys wrote, that one line which goes, and sanctify to us our deepest distress. We find the core of thinking about virtue, that is about thinking about excellence, in the ascetic writings of the ancient desert, the ancient church, or in such great thinkers as St. Maximus the Confessor. For them, virtue, often we're confusing this with values in our world. I don't mean values at all. I mean virtue. Virtue is inherently linked to one's struggle, not one's victories. One's struggle toward communion with God, or what, in the Orthodox tradition, we use that lovely little Greek word, theosis. We remember the great Athanasius who went to the Council of Nicaea, who said that God has become human. God poured himself into the human so that human beings may become God, so that human beings may have restored to them the image and likeness in which they were created, so they will know that's who they are. The affirmation or seeing or the intuiting that all creation was made for communion, communion with the uncreated, is to affirm that all creation, all that which is discarded, all that which is retrieved, all that which is repurposed, all bits and pieces, is sacramental. Is sacramental. If you could but see, already shot through with the divine presence, even as it lay on the garbage heap. There is no space between the created and the uncreated, as it would make no sense to confine God to a particular space. Creation is not given the capacity, us creatures, all of creation is not given the capacity to jump over an abyss to meet the divine presence. Creation, if we could only but see it, manifests iconically the divine presence which is everywhere and fillest all things. That's why we chant, Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death. And upon those in the tombs, and upon that discarded, and upon that lost, bestowing life. But before we can be taught to see, who would not learn to look? We must, as Maximus the Confessor and Dorotheos of Gaza, our old friends, taught, we must acquire, or maybe it is just to be open to, the virtue of humility. Barry's humility, obvious to me, even though I don't know him well, is the reason he has seen the discarded subjects of life, the presence of the sacred in the object of no use, in that which, as Christina has talked about so eloquently, is moving into obsolescence. The reason he cares for the souls of his students opens easily. The reason he is so attentive and interested in colleagues and what they have to say as so beautifully spoken of by your colleague to begin here, is because, unlike at least some of us, humility is normal for him. The virtue of humility must first be acquired before one can hope, even hope to love God and neighbor. Theosis, then, is nothing less than the struggle to fulfill the greatest commandment. Insofar as virtue is related to love, virtues build relationships of intimacy, of trust, of compassion, of empathy, of friendship, of caring, of humility, of honesty, and I suppose most of all, of mercy. Mercy, comes from a beautiful Greek word, and we chant it all the time, Kyrie eleison. Eleison is the root word of the olive tree. And mercy is to anoint. It's to pour the oil of gladness on the wounds of the world. Not with the fantasy that those wounds disappear, but that they can be healed enough that one can become supple again and do it differently. Look at those reliquaries today. And smell and see if you don't get a whiff of chrism. Martin Buber, in reflecting on art, talked about the eternal source of art. He said that a person is faced by a form which desires to be made through that person, through that man or woman, into a work. When I walked in there yesterday, I also thought, I remembered Plato, who said, all human beings are mad. The only question is whether you are divinely mad or demonically mad. And I know which this is. The form, Buber says, is no offspring of his soul, but is an appearance which steps up to it and demands of it the effective power. The man, the woman, is concerned with an act of their being. The creative moment is an act not of doing, but of being. If he carries it through, if he speaks the primal word out of his being to the form which appears, then the effective power streams out and the work arises. I don't know how else to think of Barry's work. This is not something somebody's created. It's just too bizarre. Barry has been the occasion of the speaking of 18 such primal words. Buber is touching on how it is that in this life, in the midst of the organized inadequacies of history, the detritus of human experience, how it is that we experience that meeting in which everything is a thou and nothing is an it, in which all become subject and nothing object. For thou meets me through grace, It is not found by seeking, but my speaking of the primary word to it is an act of my being, is indeed the act of my being. You, Barry, stepped into the meeting with thou. The relationship means being chosen and choosing, suffering and action in one, just as an action of the whole being, which means the suspension of all partial actions and consequently of all sensations of actions, grounded only in their particular limitations, is bound to resemble suffering. So bless you, Barry, and for shaping, through your faithfulness, the opportunity for us meeting the presence of God, thou, in the midst of the detritus of life. You were given the end of a golden string. You wound it into a ball, and it has led you in at heaven's gate, built in the fragile crumbling of Jerusalem's wall.
Biola University prepares Christians to think biblically about everything, from science to business to education and the arts. Learn more at biola.edu.